At 78, she left without anger, only love. Part 1. The Last Move. Clara Whitmore sat by the window of her modest Springfield apartment, her thin hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. Outside, the early morning sun painted golden lines across the sidewalk, and the sound of birdsong drifted through the open window. It was a peaceful morning, the kind she had known for years, but today, there was a tremble in her chest that had nothing to do with age. She was leaving. At 78 years old, Clara had grown accustomed to living alone. Her husband, Henry, had passed away nearly 8 years earlier, and since then, life had become a slow, quiet routine. There were the same morning walks, the same cup of tea at exactly 3 o'clock, the same long evenings with her sewing machine. It wasn't exciting, but it was hers. Clara lived on a pension of $350 a month, just enough to scrape by if she shopped carefully, cooked her own meals, and rarely treated herself. After Henry died, she had discovered he'd left behind a small but pressing debt. It wasn't much, but Clara had always believed in settling things honestly. Without complaint, she used what little savings she had to pay it off. No one else knew. Not her daughter. Not her friends. Clara believed dignity meant carrying your burdens quietly. For 50 years, she had worked in a local garment factory, sewing clothes under the steady hum of fluorescent lights. Her co-workers had come and gone, machines had changed, but Clara remained. Reliable, precise, underappreciated. When she retired, the factory gave her a handshake and a fruit basket. No party, no plaque. She took the bus home that day, the fruit basket on her lap, and wept behind her sunglasses. Now, everything she owned fit into 4 cardboard boxes and a rolling suitcase. Her daughter Amanda had insisted she move in with them in the suburbs outside Chicago. "Mom, it's not safe for you to be alone," Amanda had said over the phone, her voice firm but kind. "We've got plenty of room. The kids would love to see more of you." Clara had hesitated. She wasn't ready to leave her little apartment, her favorite reading chair, the grocery clerk who always saved her bruised bananas at a discount. But Amanda was persuasive, and after all, it wasn't just about safety. It was about being closer to family. Clara had imagined a life filled with shared dinners, helping her grandchildren with homework, baking cookies on weekends. A new chapter. So she boarded a bus, suitcase in hand, wearing her best cardigan and her old leather shoes, polished to a shine. Amanda greeted her with a warm smile, hugging her mother tighter than she had in years. "Welcome home, Mom," Amanda had said. Clara stepped into the sprawling 2-story house with high ceilings and a backyard that looked like a magazine photo. It was everything her modest apartment was not: modern, spacious, and bustling with life. Amanda's husband, Doug, was polite if distracted. The children, Sophie and Tyler, peeked at her from behind a tablet before running back upstairs. Amanda showed Clara to her room on the first floor. "It'll be easier for you, with your knees," she said. Clara nodded, though her knees worked just fine. The room was neat, impersonal, a guest room, not a bedroom. Clara placed her suitcase beside the bed and began unpacking. She set her framed photo of Henry on the nightstand and hung up her favorite shawl, trying to make the space feel like hers. In the first few weeks, Clara kept herself busy. She offered to cook dinner, help fold laundry, and volunteered to walk Sophie to the bus stop. At first, Amanda seemed grateful, but as time went on, her smiles grew thinner. One evening, Clara spent the whole afternoon preparing beef stew from scratch. It was Henry's favorite recipe, one she hadn't made since he passed. She hoped it might bring everyone together. When dinner time came, Amanda arrived late, stressed from work, and announced they were ordering pizza. "The kids had a rough day," she explained, barely glancing at the steaming pot on the stove. Clara served herself a small bowl and quietly stored the rest in the fridge. Over time, Clara noticed that the upstairs world belonged to Amanda and her family. Laughter, voices, and life echoed from above. Downstairs, in her corner of the house, Clara listened through the ceiling. The children rarely came down to visit. Doug passed her in the hallway with a quick nod. Amanda spoke to her mostly in questions. "Can you watch the kids?" Or, "Did you eat yet?" She began to feel like a boarder rather than a mother. Once, while helping Tyler with a science project, She gently offered an idea about his volcano model. The boy rolled his eyes and muttered, "Grandma, just go watch your shows or something." Amanda, who had been nearby, said nothing. Clara retreated to her room and pulled out her old journal. She didn't write much, just a few lines. "I don't belong here. I miss the quiet." She still tried. She baked cookies, only to find them untouched. She bought Sophie a small sketch pad and watercolor set. Sophie thanked her politely, but continued playing video games. Clara cleaned the kitchen, vacuumed the stairs, and folded towels, without being asked. She wanted to be helpful, to be seen. One day, she overheard Tyler telling his sister, "Grandma's weird. She just hangs around all the time." Amanda shushed him, but didn't correct him. The worst came when Clara caught a cold that winter. She'd been feeling dizzy, her cough worsening by the hour. When Amanda found her in the kitchen trying to boil water for tea, she looked exasperated. "Mom, you can't get sick right now. Doug's under a lot of pressure at work, and I can't take time off again. Please just stay in your room." Clara nodded, retreating to the dim guest room. She sipped lukewarm tea and wept under her blanket, not for the cold in her chest, but for the one in her heart. By the time spring came around, Clara no longer waited for Amanda to come home from work. She no longer cooked meals or offered to help with the children. She had become invisible in a house full of people. Her presence was tolerated, not welcomed. She reread the letter Amanda had written when inviting her to stay. It had been so full of warmth. "You won't be alone anymore, Mom." Clara stared at the words, remembering the hope they had given her. But hope was not enough. One quiet night in May, Clara packed her suitcase again. She folded her clothes carefully, placing them inside with the same methodical care she had shown her entire life. She wrote a letter and left it on the kitchen counter, just below the family calendar. She didn't take the bus this time. She called a cab, the driver helping her load the suitcase into the trunk. As the car pulled away from the neatly trimmed lawn, Clara looked out the window at the house where she had tried to find belonging and found only distance. Back in Springfield, she rented a small room in the same apartment building she had left behind. By some miracle, it was still available. The landlord, an old friend from her factory days, offered it to her at a reduced rate. Clara unpacked slowly. She placed Henry's photo on the nightstand once more. She hung up her shawl and opened the window to let the spring air in. The room was smaller, older, a little drafty, but it was hers. She sat by the window with her chipped coffee mug and listened to the birds. There was no family laughter upstairs, no footsteps of children, just the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, and her own steady breathing. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt at peace. Part 2, A Life Rekindled. Clara Whitmore woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window panes. In Springfield, rain came often in the spring, soft and cleansing, washing away winter's memory. She sat up slowly, her joints stiff but cooperative. She no longer needed to rush for anyone. The apartment was hers, and the silence was a companion, not an enemy. It had been nearly 3 weeks since she quietly left Amanda's home in Chicago. No one had called. No one had come looking for her. And oddly, Clara found relief in that. She had spent a year and a half trying to belong in her daughter's house, thinking proximity would mean closeness, thinking service would earn love. She had done it all, cooked, cleaned, watched over her grandchildren, and had still felt like a stranger sleeping on borrowed time. Now, back in the small apartment she had once given up, Clara was surrounded by her own things, her own air, her own rhythm. The loneliness hadn't disappeared, but it felt more honest here, more manageable. She looked around. The walls were the same dull beige, the carpet a bit worn, but the place held memories. It held freedom. Here, she could breathe without worrying about being in the way. Clara began building a new routine. Each morning, she woke early, drank a cup of tea, and walked down to the local bakery where she used to buy day-old bread for $1. The owner, Miguel, remembered her right away. "Mrs. Whitmore, haven't seen you in a while. You been okay?" Clara smiled. "I've been visiting family, but it's good to be back." Miguel handed her a small loaf of rye, warm from the oven. "This one's fresh. On the house today." Back home, She began experimenting in the kitchen again. She had always loved baking but rarely indulged herself. There was no one to eat the cookies or cakes, and she had always been too careful with money. But now, she gave herself permission. She bought flour, eggs, sugar. She found an old mixer at the thrift store and dusted it off. Her first creation was a simple lemon pound cake, the kind Henry used to love. She placed it on a glass plate and set it on the windowsill to cool. The smell filled the apartment and seeped into the hallway. An hour later, her neighbor Millie, an 82-year-old widow who played the violin badly but passionately, knocked on the door. "Clara, are you baking?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "I am. Would you like some?" That became a ritual. Every few days, Clara tried a new recipe: cinnamon rolls, banana bread, apple tarts. The smell would drift through the hallway, and neighbors would stop by, drawn by the scent and the warmth she offered. "Feels like home here," Millie once said, biting into a warm blueberry scone. Clara smiled. That's the idea. She wasn't wealthy. Her pension still totaled just over $350 a month, and after rent and groceries, she lived on about $2 a day. But she was creative and frugal, and the joy she gained from baking and sharing far outweighed the cost of sugar and flour. In the afternoons, Clara began painting again. She had dabbled when she was younger, watercolors mostly, landscapes and small still lifes, but life had swept those hobbies aside. Now, she set up a folding table by the window, laid out brushes and paper, and let her mind wander. She painted the alley behind her building, the cafe where she sipped coffee, the people passing on the street. They weren't masterpieces, but they were hers. One rainy afternoon, she painted the view outside her window, the gray sky, the glistening pavement, a single bird perched on the telephone wire. It was simple, but something about it stirred her heart. She tacked it to the wall above her bed and titled it Solitude. She also began keeping a journal, not the quick, dry notes she'd once scribbled during lonely days in her daughter's house, but real reflections. She wrote about her factory years, about her marriage to Henry, about the first time she held Amanda in her arms. She wrote about the hurt of being invisible, about the ache of giving love that wasn't returned. But she also wrote about the small joys, the bakery, the smell of rising bread, the laughter of neighbors. Clara didn't intend to share her writing. It was her way of making sense of her story. But one afternoon, while waiting at the library for her turn on the public computer, she struck up a conversation with a volunteer named Thomas, a gentle middle-aged man who taught a senior writing group. "We just sit around, drink tea, and share stories," he explained. "You should join us sometime." She hesitated. "I don't know if my stories are worth telling." He smiled. "If they're real, they're worth it." The following Thursday, Clara found herself in a circle of 6, 4 women and 2 men, all over 60, each holding notebooks and mugs of tea. One by one, they read aloud. There were tales of wartime love, childhood mischief, heartbreak, and resilience. When it was her turn, Clara's hands trembled as she read an entry titled The Night I Left. It was the story of her silent departure from Amanda's house, the suitcase, the cab, the letter left on the counter. When she finished, the room was quiet. A woman named Jean reached out and gently touched her hand. "That took courage," she said. "You gave a voice to what so many of us have felt." That evening, Clara felt something shift. Her story mattered, not because it was grand or dramatic, but because it was honest. Word spread in the neighborhood about the woman in apartment 2B who painted, baked, and wrote stories that made people cry. Clara received small notes in her mailbox. "Your cookies made my day," or "Your painting reminded me of home." One day, a soft envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a watercolor of a girl and her grandmother sitting on a porch, sharing a slice of cake. The girl had curly hair and a crooked smile. On the back, in shaky pencil, was written, "I'm sorry for what I said. I miss you. Love, Sophie." Clara stared at the drawing for a long time. Her hands trembled as she folded it gently and placed it in a drawer. She didn't respond. Not yet. By the end of the year, Clara made a decision. She wasn't sick, but she was growing older, and she didn't want to be a burden on anyone again. The thought of becoming fragile and dependent frightened her, not for herself, but for the way it might force her back into someone else's reluctant care. She visited a small elder care home run by a local nonprofit group. The building was clean, quiet, with a garden in the back and a row of rocking chairs on the porch. The staff greeted her kindly and answered all her questions. "You don't have to move in immediately," the director said, "but if you ever feel ready, we'd be happy to have you." Clara nodded. 2 months later, she packed her bags once more. This time, there was no secrecy. She left notes for her neighbors, giving away some of her kitchen tools and her collection of teacups. She kept only the essentials, a few clothes, her journal, her paints, and a box of handwritten recipes. Millie wept when Clara told her, "This building won't be the same without your cinnamon rolls." "You'll visit," Clara said, smiling. Her room at the care home was smaller than her apartment, but sunlit and warm. She set up her paints by the window and placed Henry's photo on the dresser. The other residents welcomed her with soft handshakes and curious eyes. She joined an art group, taught a weekly baking class, and shared her stories at evening gatherings. One day, the staff asked if they could record her story for a community project on aging and resilience. Clara agreed. She spoke into the microphone with clarity and grace, telling her journey, not as a victim, but as a woman who had found peace after pain. Her story was shared on a local radio station and went viral online, reaching hundreds of thousands. Letters poured in from strangers who thanked her for her honesty. "You reminded me to call my mom," one wrote. "My grandmother lives with us. I never realized how invisible she must feel," said another. Even Amanda heard it. She came to the facility one afternoon in early spring, parking her car across the street and standing beside the fence. She didn't come in. She just stood there, watching Clara sit in a rocking chair, painting the cherry blossoms on a nearby tree. Clara saw her. Their eyes met. Amanda didn't wave. Clara didn't move. After a few minutes, Amanda turned and left. Clara returned to her painting. Part 3. The Quiet Bloom. Spring melted into summer, and with it, Clara Whitmore's days at the elder care home grew warmer, slower, and filled with purpose. Though she no longer needed to wake early to rush anywhere, Clara always rose with the sun, savoring the hush before the halls stirred with walkers and soft-soled slippers. She had become a gentle fixture at the facility, someone others naturally gravitated toward. The staff called her Sunshine Clara, because her room always smelled of lemon zest or cinnamon, and her smile had the steady warmth of morning light. Yet behind that quiet smile was a woman still carefully stitching together the broken threads of her past, finding her own shape again after years of folding herself to fit others. On the surface, her life appeared simple. Baking scones on Tuesdays, watercolor classes on Thursdays, evening tea circles on the back porch. But within those small rituals, Clara found something profound, a kind of healing she hadn't known she needed. One of her favorite routines was spending time in the garden. Though her knees didn't let her kneel for long, she'd sit in a chair with a wide-brimmed hat, pruning lavender bushes or watering the tomato plants with a small tin can. Other residents often joined her, though few stayed as long. For Clara, that patch of earth represented freedom. The scent of damp soil and the sound of bees were reminders that life continued, softly, stubbornly, even after disappointment. One afternoon, a nurse named Danielle brought a folder to Clara's room. "We received another letter for you," she said. Clara's heart skipped. She took the envelope and opened it slowly. Inside was a card decorated with a drawing of a cupcake, uneven but full of color. It was signed, "From Sophie. P.S. I baked banana muffins with Mom. They didn't taste like yours." Clara chuckled. A mix of joy and sorrow swelled in her chest. She still didn't respond. The ache was tender, but she wasn't ready to reopen wounds. Not yet. Later that evening, sitting beneath a string of soft porch lights, Clara wrote about Sophie in her journal. "She's growing up. I wonder if she remembers the sound of my lullabies or just the tension in her mother's silence. Children see more than we think, and sometimes they say what we cannot." Clara had never blamed Sophie, not truly. Children echoed what they absorbed. It was Amanda's silence, her refusal to shield Clara from emotional harm, that had pierced the deepest. The memory of the day her granddaughter told her to go home still stung. But pain was no longer the center of her life. She was building something new from the inside out. One morning, as Clara sat sketching the garden, a local college student named Lily came to interview her. "I'm doing a project on aging and identity," she said, voice nervous but kind. "I read your story online. I'd love to learn more about what brings you peace." Clara smiled. "Peace? That's a big word. Let me think." She gazed out the window for a moment, fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. "Peace," she finally said, "is being able to sit with yourself and not feel like you're waiting for someone else's permission to be happy." Lily nodded, scribbling rapidly. "That's beautiful. Can I quote you?" Clara chuckled. "Only if you spell my name right." Over the next few weeks, Clara became a quiet sensation on social media. Lily's video interview, barely 10 minutes long, was shared thousands of times. In the clip, Clara spoke simply but honestly, offering reflections about aging, regret, and the quiet joys of freedom. Her words struck a nerve. "Some days, I think of all the ways I tried to be useful just to be seen. But now, I bake because it makes me happy. I paint because I love the colors, not because anyone's watching." One comment read, "My grandmother lives with us, and I never thought about how she might feel. Thank you, Clara." Another, "She reminds me that it's okay to start over, even at 78. The staff printed some of the comments and pasted them onto a poster board in Clara's room. She read them slowly, tears forming in her eyes. "I never thought my life would matter to strangers," she whispered. "But maybe telling the truth, maybe that's enough." As the summer waned, Clara noticed her energy waning too. Not dramatically, just a slow, creeping fatigue. At first, she chalked it up to age. But when she began skipping meals, feeling winded after simple tasks, the staff gently urged her to see the doctor. A quiet visit confirmed what Clara had suspected. Her lungs were weakening. The strain from her earlier years in the sewing factory, 50 years of dust, fibers, poor ventilation, was taking its toll. The doctor was gentle, honest. "There's no immediate danger, Clara, but this is progressive. We can manage it, but you should prepare." Clara thanked him, returned to her room, and sat by the window for a long time. She wasn't afraid. Not really. But she knew the time had come to think about endings. Not with dread, but with care. Over the next few weeks, Clara began organizing her belongings. She sorted through her recipes, handwritten on yellowing index cards, and chose her favorites to compile into a book. She painted a soft watercolor of each dish: her lemon pound cake, her cherry cobbler, her rosemary biscuits. A staff member offered to scan and bind them into a keepsake. "I want this for my granddaughter," Clara said softly. "Even if she doesn't remember the taste, she'll know it came from love." She also wrote a letter, long and honest, addressed to Amanda. She didn't send it. Instead, she folded it and placed it inside the recipe book. In it she wrote, "I don't blame you anymore. You had your own storms, your own fatigue. I only wish we had been able to see each other as women, not just mother and daughter. I love you, Amanda. I always have. I just wish I'd felt it back." Her final watercolor was of the porch where she had last seen Amanda standing behind the fence. She titled it Almost. In late autumn, as COVID-19 quietly swept through the care facility despite precautions, Clara contracted the virus. It hit her gently at first, a mild fever, a bit of breathlessness. The staff monitored her carefully, but they could see the toll it was taking on her already fragile lungs. Still, Clara smiled through it. When the nurse brought her tea, she whispered, "I'm okay. I've had such a good chapter." They moved her to a private room with a view of the garden. The trees had shed most of their leaves, and the branches looked like reaching fingers. Clara stared at them often, her breathing slower now, more deliberate. A few days later, Amanda came. She wore a mask, held a bouquet of fall flowers, and stood outside the glass window. She didn't knock. She just stood there, watching Clara, tears in her eyes. Clara looked up from her bed and saw her daughter. She smiled and placed her hand softly against the glass. Amanda mirrored it, and for a long, silent moment they stayed that way. Mother and daughter, two women separated by glass, regret, and time, but finally, perhaps, beginning to understand one another. Amanda mouthed, "I'm sorry." Clara nodded slowly. That night, Clara asked for her journal, wrote one last entry, and laid it on the bedside table. She fell asleep to the sound of a gentle rain, just like in Springfield. When the staff entered her room the next morning, Clara had passed peacefully. They found her recipe book, her watercolors, and her journal open to a final message. If you are reading this, know that love never disappears. It simply waits, like bread rising in the oven, for the right warmth to bring it forth. My life was not perfect, but it was mine, and I leave it with peace. Part 4. The Seed She Planted. The morning of Clara Whitmore's passing was cold, but the sun cut through the clouds in soft, golden beams, as if even the sky wanted to honor her final chapter. The elder care staff moved gently around her room, their voices hushed, eyes misted. In a place where loss was familiar, Clara's departure stirred something deeper. She had become more than just a resident. She had become their storyteller, their baker, their reminder that dignity and grace could bloom even in solitude. Danielle, the nurse who had known Clara best, placed the watercolor cookbook on the table at the front lobby, beside a small candle and a framed photo of Clara in her garden hat. Residents paused there throughout the day, some whispering prayers, others offering smiles. Amanda arrived later that afternoon. She stepped slowly through the hallways, holding Sophie's hand. Neither of them spoke as they were led to Clara's room, now quiet and still, her belongings neatly packed, her journal set atop her favorite quilt. Amanda stood in the center of the room, eyes falling on the watercolor of the porch. The title, Almost, tore something open inside her. She turned toward the staff. Was she in pain? Danielle shook her head gently. No. She passed in her sleep. Peaceful. She even smiled before the end. Amanda nodded, but her hands trembled. I didn't know how to reach her, she whispered. I thought giving her a place to live was enough. But it wasn't. I see that now. Danielle walked over and handed her the envelope Clara had left behind, Amanda's name written in careful cursive on the front. Amanda clutched it to her chest and sat by the window. That night, in the quiet of her home, Amanda read Clara's final letter. I know now you loved me in your own way, but we were both tired. You had your family to care for, and I didn't want to be one more weight on your shoulders. Still, I longed to hear your voice call me Mom with warmth. I longed for acknowledgement, not out of duty, but of love. I wasn't perfect, Amanda. I worked too long, sacrificed too much, and forgot how to ask for what I needed. But I never stopped loving you. I only wish we'd talked more, listened more. There was still time, but we were both too careful with it. So I leave you this, my peace, my recipes, my journals, my memories of you as a child, laughing, dancing, full of light, and my wish that you forgive me, as I have already forgiven you. Amanda cried, not the tears of guilt alone, but the tears that come when clarity finally meets regret. She went into the kitchen and pulled Clara's cookbook from her bag. Come here, she called to Sophie, who was sitting on the couch. Her daughter wandered in, cautious. Grandma left this for us. They flipped through the pages together. Clara's cherry cobbler in bright pinks and reds, the cinnamon rolls Amanda remembered from childhood, the note on the last page. Baking isn't about the perfect texture. It's about the warmth you leave behind. Over the next few weeks, something shifted in Amanda. She started waking up earlier, opening the windows to let light in. She brought out Clara's old teacups from storage and began making lemon tea, just the way her mother had liked it, with honey, not sugar. One Saturday, she and Sophie made Clara's signature cornbread muffins. They followed the watercolor recipe step by step. As they baked, Amanda told stories. How Clara had worked in a small sewing shop for 5 decades. How she'd worn the same apron for years. How she always hummed when she was happy. She used to hum that one, Sophie asked, as Amanda unconsciously sang an old folk tune. Yes, Amanda said, surprised. I didn't realize I remembered it. Sophie grinned. Can we paint like her too? That night, Amanda pulled out a set of watercolors she'd bought years ago but never opened. They sat at the dining table, painting scones and cups and garden flowers. Sophie painted a crooked lavender bush and labeled it, "For Grandma Clara." As the months passed, Amanda began speaking more openly about her mother, at first with hesitation, then with pride. She told friends about Clara's quiet strength, her decision to leave and live with dignity, her viral video that had touched thousands. She reread her mother's journal entries and began posting small quotes online. Love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just keeps baking until someone notices the smell. Being useful is lovely, but being seen? That's priceless. Strangers began messaging Amanda. "My mom lives with us, and I think I've misunderstood her. I read your mother's story. It made me visit my grandmother after years. She reminded me that aging doesn't mean fading." Amanda realized that her mother's greatest legacy wasn't just her strength, it was her honesty. The courage to admit her hurt, the decision to leave without resentment, and the quiet pursuit of joy, even at the edge of life. On Clara's birthday that spring, Amanda hosted a small memorial gathering in the backyard. She set up a long table covered in Clara's baked goods, lemon bars, peach pie, rosemary biscuits. Each had a little watercolor card beside it, copied from the recipe book. Neighbors came. Former co-workers from Amanda's office, parents from Sophie's school. Even Danielle from the elder care home drove in with a tray of scones Clara had once taught her to bake. Before they ate, Amanda stood in front of the group. "My mother didn't die bitter. She didn't blame us. She left quietly, with grace. But I now know that grace doesn't erase pain. It just holds it gently. She gave us more than recipes. She gave us an example. And I want to live up to that for her and for Sophie." Sophie stood beside her, holding up a painting. It was a garden. In the center stood an elderly woman in a lavender sweater, surrounded by bees, lavender, and lemon trees. At the bottom, Sophie had written, "My grandma was never a burden. She was a garden." A year later, Amanda began volunteering once a week at a local senior center, baking with the residents, listening to their stories. She brought along her mother's recipe book and taught Clara's favorites. She learned their names, asked them about their childhoods. One woman cried after tasting the cinnamon rolls. "My son hasn't called me in months," she whispered. Amanda placed her hand gently over hers. "I know how that silence feels," she said, "but you're not forgotten here." And Clara? She lived on in every batch of muffins, every painted recipe card, every grandmother who felt just a little less invisible. Her story continued to circulate, passed on in blogs, podcasts, and memory circles. Some said she was brave for leaving her daughter's home. Others said she was brave for trying to stay as long as she did. But perhaps the truth was simpler. Clara was brave for choosing herself, not out of defiance, but out of love. Love for her daughter, her granddaughter, and for the part of herself that still believed in warmth, even after the oven had grown cold. Epilogue: a note from Clara. The final page of Clara's cookbook, nestled between watercolors and tea stains, held a handwritten message. "To my family, I hope you remember not just my food, but the way I hummed in the kitchen. I hope you dance in your living room, wear soft socks, and find joy in the ordinary. And when life gets loud, bake something quiet. Remember, love isn't in the grand gestures. It's in the extra biscuit on the plate, the hand on the shoulder, the letter never sent but always meant. I was never trying to leave you. I was trying to find me. And I did. With love and a little cinnamon, Clara." If Clara's story touched your heart, please consider giving this video a like to help it reach more people who may need to hear it. We'd love to hear from you. Have you had a similar experience with an aging parent or grandparent? Share your thoughts or memories in the comments below. Your words might comfort someone else going through the same thing. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more meaningful, real-life stories about family, aging, resilience, and healing. Every like, comment, and subscription helps us keep sharing stories that matter. Thank you for being here.